Welcome to the seminar series on modern artificial intelligence at the NYU Tandon School of Engineering. This series has always aimed to bring together faculty, students, and researchers to discuss the most important trends in the world of AI, and that remains true even in the virtual format necessitated by the pandemic. I'll start by thanking Dean Jelena Kovacevic, as well as my own Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering, for supporting the series and allowing me to introduce you to a growing list of esteemed speakers, all of whom are world-renowned experts whose research is making an immense impact on the development of new machine learning techniques and technologies. In the process, they are helping to build a better, smarter, more equitable world, and we are proud to be bringing them to you. I'm pleased to note that the majority of this year's speakers are women, some of them women of color. That seems quite fitting here at NYU Tandon, a school very much dedicated to advancing diversity and inclusion in the STEM fields. We have with us today a researcher who is as comfortable in the halls of Congress as she is in the halls of academia. And she's spearheading important conversations and the intersection of AI, race, and policy making. So it gives me great pleasure to tell you a little bit about Mutale Nkonda before turning things over to her. A true citizen of the world, Mutale was born in Zambia, grew up in Britain, and lived in Russia and Japan, among other places, before moving to New York City. She began her career as a journalist and worked at the BBC, where she produced long-form documentaries of contemporary Black British culture before transitioning into the tech and policy realm. She now seeks to create a safe space for Black STEM professionals who feel marginalized within the wider tech sector. As a Data and Society Fellow, Mutale launched a briefing series on Capitol Hill called the Dorothy Vaughan Tech Symposium, named for the pioneering Black computer programmer. By the way, if you don't already know about Vaughan's amazing contributions to the nation's early space program, I highly recommend you look her up. Mutale was also instrumental in introducing the Algorithm Accountability Act, Deepfake Accountability Act, and No Biometric Barriers to Housing Act with the Office of Congresswoman Yvette Clarke of New York's 9th District. She is the founding director of AI for the People, a nonprofit that seeks to use journalism, the arts, and popular culture to educate Black audiences about the social justice implications of AI technologies in public life. During the 2020 presidential election, her team identified a disinformation network targeting Black voters in the Philadelphia news ecosystem. And this year, the organization launched a biometric justice vertical by producing a film supporting a ban of facial recognition in New York State in partnership with Amnesty International. Mutale currently sits on the TikTok Content Moderation Advisory Board, advises the Center of Media, Technology, and Democracy at McGill University, and is a key constituent for the UN Precy Table on AI. She writes widely on the racial impact of advanced technical systems, and her work has appeared in the New York Times, Fast Company, and Harvard Business Review, among numerous other outlets. I know we are all eager to hear her very timely presentation, which is entitled Elections, Online Chatter, and Content Moderation. So without further ado, let me present Mutale Nkonda.
Thank you so much, Anna. Thank you for this kind invitation. And just hi to all the folks at NYU Tandon. I live in downtown Brooklyn, the other side of the Albee Square Mall. So I'm your neighbor, I'm very close, and I'm hoping that I can come and see you guys in person in the not too distant future. I'm always really embarrassed by introductions, but the one thing that I did leave off was right at the beginning of my career, kind of 2010, 2011, I had worked alongside folks at NY Tandon because I was a volunteer with Black Girls Code, and we used to have many of our hackathons there. So definitely over the last 10 years, I've known that there has been a deep commitment to not only introducing women to computer science, but specifically Black women, even at the girl level. So my talk is going to be in two major parts. The first part is about a 45-minute presentation about some of the disinformation work that AI for the People did in the last election. And then I want to give way for about 15 minutes of comments and discussions. It's non-technical because in my work, we want people to understand the impacts of algorithmic decision-making. And I always say that if we have to use the word algorithm, then we're not being clear enough. So please forgive me on that at a computer science school. So you've heard about me. I'm here in New York City. I've worked in tech for the last 10 years. My entry point was actually opposite Google's external affairs team, which is where I first met Congresswoman Clark. And they were really concerned in making sure politicians in New York State and New York City, specifically Black politicians, understood the benefits of having the community benefits of having Google in their ecosystem as their constituents and doing good for New York. And I did that work very happily until I read Weapons of Math Destruction by Cathy O'Neil. And that was really my introduction to the societal impacts of AI technology on Black communities. And out of that, built a body of research, which I'm going to discuss, and then eventually AI for the People. So I'm going to start in just grounding our discussion in that. So we're a communications firm, as you know. I'm a journalist, and I still do very much consider myself a storyteller first, technologist second. And our mission is to reduce racial bias in tech. And we do that really through policy engagement. So we're not building systems, we're not in a research lab, we're communicating how these systems impact and then speaking to either companies and or government. As you know, I've done federal level policy work to develop frameworks within which these technologies can be rights respecting as well as justice affirming. And I'll speak about what that means later. So 2 buckets of work. As you know, we do a biometric vertical, which really is the work with Amnesty and the film we've produced there. But we'd also be really interested in autonomous cars. So I'm going to come back to you all on that and the impact that they will have, because of course, some of the sensors that are within those cars are leveraging facial recognition, audio recognition as well to help the cars make determinations, as well as race technology and information integrity. And that's really the vertical where we're looking at social media and the impacts that it has, not just on our society, but for this talk, our election and democracy at large. So I'm going to speak about that later. I'm a filmmaker. When I was working in journalism, I made documentary films, so leaning very heavily into that art form, but we use visual art to tell these stories. And we've actually just partnered with a Brooklyn-based AR company to use augmented reality to help folks understand concepts like defund the police or other concepts that are difficult for people to understand. But if we can see them by gamification through app technology, they can become real. And what I'm going to describe in my presentation is computational ethnography, so digital ethnography of a Twitter data set. And that's kind of our bread and butter on the information integrity side. If we are successful, then there will be a technological analysis to all racial justice work. And what that means is whether people are organizing around food access or housing or water access or criminal justice, they will understand how the technologies that are made in research labs, like those algorithmic decision-making systems, impact their issue area and have language and a strategy for that. So really the normalization of tech policy away from being this siloed thing where you have acts like the one I introduced, the Algorithmic Accountability Act, and instead in all our legislating, thinking, well, what is the algorithmic angle? And I can certainly speak about that later, but even now with the Biden administration, I'm being asked to come in and look at a suite of technologies and then really talk them through the racial impact. And hopefully there would be a field of work. So I'm very grateful for the attention I get for this work, but I would love to see the future where this is how we think about policy. And this is another entry point for computer scientists to potentially come in if policy is their bag. So our theory of change is really based in queer Black feminism, specifically Audre Lorde is somebody that we think about a lot in our work. And the reason that we think about Audre Lorde is that in her work, she centers this idea of the wellness of women and the wellness of Black women. So we're really interested in developing systems that are anti-racist, because that's not just going to benefit Black women, that's going to benefit all people of color, and anti-sexist, all women, who are 51% of the population. And if you have something that is good for women, then you're going to have something that is also good for men. The analogy that I always use is back in before times, I was a high heels wearer. So I would go to the indentation in the sidewalk to walk across the street because it was less impact. Those indentations were designed for wheelchair users so that they would be able to dismount the curb and get onto the street easiest. But myself as an able-bodied person still benefited from that. Same if you have little children. I have teenagers now, but when my kids were small, their little legs would find it easier to get off the curb. And our unique value proposition is that we're looking at research that centers the impact on BIPOC communities, so Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, at the design stage. So as technologies are being designed, are we thinking about how the zip code input, for example, in technologies that use population data becomes a proxy for race? Are we thinking about how using markers like I recently moved from Bed-Stuy to Fort Greene, I could get Verizon Wireless, and I was told that what they do is take the median credit score of an area, and then Verizon will decide if they want to invest in that area, right? So the median credit score, people with more money are going to have higher credit scores. Those people are also more likely to be white. That means when I lived in Bed-Stuy in a low-income Black community, I had to get Optimum. But now that I live in a predominantly white community, I get 5G internet, right? So using data in a way that would, in the deployment, have a disproportionate impact, negative impact on Black folks. And then, of course, the governing. As I've said before, my entry point to this conversation isn't just the design of the technology and the promise of what it can do, but how does that rubber hit the road? What rules, regulations, policies are we crafting to make sure that it's safe for anybody? And then using artistic art, journalism, arts, and culture so that people understand that. And just going back to Lorde, this quote comes from a speech that she gave in 1978, because yes, we do believe that women are dangerous, and we believe that their danger is used for the good of society. So to race, technology, and information integrity, we decided that data journalism was going to become an issue area for us because when we read an article by Pew Research Center that said 55% of all adults in the United States get their news from social media. The reason that was of interest of us is that social media systems are not just showing us what people are tweeting or updating. What they're doing is that they're using algorithmic recommendations, sorting systems to figure out what do we like to read, what do we like to retweet, what do we comment on, and then they are sharing that information for us. So in my prior conversation, we spoke a lot about decision trees and prioritization of data. And in social, for the AI algorithms that are driving social media, those types of decisions are being made day to day because they want to prioritize information that we're going to spend time on. And in doing so, be able to sell advertising. And so as I'm having this conversation, we always have to remember that with these tech companies, we're thinking about maximizing shareholder value over potentially public good. And that's kind of where my work comes in. So our question was, if 55% of people are getting their news, which they believe to be objective and true, from a private company that is prioritizing showing them things that may not be true or may not be good for them, what happens to our democracy? So we started to talk to some journalists. I use ethnographic techniques in my research. I'm a qualitative researcher, so I'm really interested in stories and classifying and tagging stories. And as we spoke to newsrooms, we found that they did not have the capacity for computational analysis. So they too were under the impression that what they saw on social media had some objective truth, and in some cases was good for us, and that really worried us. And in 2020, what we were interested in was how Black identity would be weaponized in the context of our last election, our last presidential election. So just to kind of get us there, I just want to give you a really, really brief overview of the history of race and disinformation in this country to give some grounding for the data set that I'm going to describe. So anti-Black racism, and for those who don't know what that is, it's a form of racism that will always end up with disadvantaging Black people. We see it, unfortunately. I am certainly in mourning for Devon Wright, who was killed in Minneapolis a couple of nights ago by a police officer, but that wasn't the first killing, right? There is the trial of George Floyd happening right now that really speaks to the Black Lives Matter protests that were sparked last summer. But that was this is a long history of killings in the United States that really date back to the history of Black people coming here over 400 years ago. But where I want to really start this conversation about disinformation is in the 1930s in Soviet bloc Russia. So the poster that I'm referring to here on the left is one of Stalin. And underneath here, the people in chains are the Scottsboro Boys. The Scottsboro Boys were 9 Black boys, teenagers, who were accused of sexually assaulting a white woman. And what the American Communist Party did is that they saw this as an opportunity to develop a Black power base in the South, because those were the proletariat, those were the workers of the land, by supporting this. And they put up these posters everywhere, which operate much like memes do on social media today. And it was basically free the Scottsboro Boys. In that particular instance, this was disinformation because it was using the racism of the South, which is an actual fact, wrapping it in a mistruth, which was come and be communist, because there is no racism in communist Russia. Anybody that has read any of the books of Black people in Russia in the 30s knew that there was racism in Russia. There is racism in Russia based on Blackness, even to this day. And you'll be fine, but you have to join this party. So disinformation takes a fact, inserts a lie, and then asks somebody to take action. And in this case, it was become a communist. And that campaign was extremely successful. The Scottsboro Boys were eventually set free. And it was really thanks to the to the American Communist Party at that time that there was so much white allyship around anti-lynching in the South in the 30s, even though it was for this end. So that really died out during the MacArthur era in the 50s, where there was a witch hunt against communists. And even in the South today, you'll find a very heavy aversion to socialism as we know it with AOC, because they remember it as being a divider of the races. That tactic lay fallow, but came back in the 60s. There was another incident where Russian forces put pictures of monkeys under the doors of African leaders who'd come for the UN General Assembly here in New York. And what they were trying to do then was say, look, you're here in America, they're calling you monkeys, your newly independent countries should become Soviet. So I'm Zambian, And to this day, there is an exchange program between between Russia, it was the Soviet Union, and Zambia for educating students. And so part of how I came to Russia was through education of my parents and many people in my family as a child. Another example of race-based disinformation where it was using the same formula of, and this is in the analog, not in the digital, of taking a truth, inserting a lie, and asking people to take action, came up in the 80s in America, where this idea that the AIDS epidemic, which was true, that's the truth, had been created by the CIA in a lab, that was the lie, and what Black people and what gay people in that instance should do is really distrust their government. Now, we can argue that there are very good reasons for that to be true, given the way that this crisis was handled. But for the interest of this conversation, I'm going to argue that planting the seed of distrust in a foreign government is problematic. Like that would carry on. This continued to happen. The US were paying no attention to it. They were not diligent. The USSR breaks down as we know it. Boris Yeltsin, who is friend to the Americans, comes in and everything is fine. Gorbachev is fine. And everything seems really good until Putin gets into office and he wants to regain the power lost. So the next time we see Russian interference is in 2016. And this is a picture of Special Counsel Robert Mueller, who read an investigation on behalf of the US Intelligence Committee on Russian interference into the 2020 election. And the major finding is that African Americans were the most impacted by disinformation in that election, except this time there is an algorithmic twist. This happens on social media, specifically the Facebook platform. And what Russian forces had been doing was using police killings like we're living through now to create social media pages like Woke Black, Blacktivist, Brown and Down. So the types of pages someone like me would click on, right, and get fed because of the feeding algorithm, because they were specific to Black people. And what they did was bring them in through talking about police brutality and how this was a problem, and eventually seed messages that would say, well, then you shouldn't vote. And that was deeply, deeply problematic, and some argue effective, even though we don't have that data in 2016. So we enter the conversation in 2020 because we know that there is this long history of race being used as a divisive factor in these disinformation campaigns. And my team and I watched this on CNN, which is a national program, August 16th, 2020. So this is, this is 4 months before the general election.
Plan or outlook for reparation? Like, how does it look? What is the strategy?
Well, first we have to rewrite HR 40. We have to hook it with money. We have to have a dollar amount attached to that.
Starting in 1989, Congressman John Conyers Jr. would repeatedly introduce HR 40, legislation seeking to establish a commission to study reparations. After he left Congress, Representative Sheila Jackson Lee took over the task of saying, "Can we talk about reparations?" So far, the answer from America has been, no. Yvette's not buying it.
You can come up with a bill for everything else. Nobody has any problem talking about how many trillions is going to be for Medicare for all. So you have to come to me with the same kind of plans you come to every other group with. You have to come to me with a budget. And I think this election year is a good way for us to hold candidates accountable.
Because a lot of the critique of ADOS has been, ADOS is telling Black people not to vote, and if Black people don't vote, then we end up with 4 more years of Trump.
If everybody has to live with it another 4 years because we don't come out in droves and support a candidate who isn't going to do anything specifically for us, that's not our fault. That Trump is not my reparations. We haven't encouraged anybody to stay at home, but we have encouraged Democratic down ballot.
Which means just vote the down ballot.
Yeah, you vote down ballot, but you vote for Democrats, but the top of the ticket gets no love unless you come to us.
Correct.
And say we have a reparations plan, which includes financial outlays of money. We have a budget attached to this. That's what we're pushing for.
So we're really interested in this because we believe that this could be evidence of a disinformation network. The woman in the video is called Yvette Carnell, and what she's saying is that Black voters should not take part in an election, which is classic voter suppression. The argument is really around lack of Black economic opportunity in the United States, which we know to be a truth. She says the only way for Black people to regain that economic opportunity is through reparations, which is a lie. It is one way to kind of redress the balance, but it's not the only way, but that's the way that it's presented. And then she tries to change Black voter behavior. She says, vote down ballot. And what voting down ballot, as Kamau Bell, this guy on screen here, says, but that would swing the election one way or the other. And it's actually something that happened in Detroit, which is an 89% Black city in the Midwest in 2006. 70,000 people in that city voted down ballot. They did not vote for Hillary Clinton or for Trump. And then that state actually swung from Obama in 2012 across to Trump in 2016. So the strategy that she is laying out is one that has been tried and one that had been shown to show that result. So we got into computational analysis. We partnered with a lab at the State University of New York, and we compiled a data set of tweets of 1.3 million tweets. We opened the hosepipe in November 2019, and we closed the hosepipe November 2020. And we used the hashtag ADIOS, which is Yvette Carnell, the woman, she leads that group. We looked at the hashtag reparations. We looked at hashtags HR40. We looked at vote down ballot hashtags. And within that, we were able to then look at the kinds of conversations that were being had within this data set, the Twitter follow patterns, the links being shared, and then follow those links to where they were going, and ultimately found that within our data set, Black people that followed those hashtags were being encouraged to take on right-wing positions. So we were able to look at this online conversation in which Black people were told things like vote down ballot. They were told things like Trump isn't that bad for Black people. They were told things like Kamala Harris isn't Black, don't vote. And the biggest message that was consistent in this data set was very, very anti-immigrant. So everything about knocking down walls, no walls, Mexicans, if you remember all of that rhetoric, it was coming up again and again and again in this data set. So this is just an example of some analysis that we did during the DNC convention. So around the time that I showed you this video, we would look at the top 10 followers each week. So I'm just going to draw your attention to follower number 7, Wisha Bumper Kuda, who had been mentioned 253 times in a week. So we pulled up the tweet out of the data set to see who this person was. And we find that they're ADOS 101. These are some of the hashtags I described: ADOS, Democratic down ballot, reparations, and Yvette Carnell, the woman in the video. And we find that this particular account had tweeted 147 times in one day. So that was tweeting more than once a second, which we thought was inauthentic behavior. So we then went back into the data set to try and look at the history of this tweet, and we found that it had been fallow for about 10 years. So we believe it had been bought. And there were some rumors that it originated in the Republic of Georgia. And if you see the screen name, was here reporting live from the Kremlin. So we're still, this account is still active. We did tell Twitter, but we were, as you can imagine, suspicious of this account. Now, this thing of really who is Black and who is not Black really has its links in this narrative that particular account shared, which was that Kamala Harris was not Black enough. So they were saying Kamala Harris is not Black because her mother is a Tamil her mother is Indian and her father is from Jamaica. Now, of course, Kamala Harris is Black, but what they were trying to say is don't vote for her as a Black candidate because she's not really Black. And this idea of who is Black and who is not Black is actually a right-wing is part of right-wing rhetoric. And the place that we saw it was in 2017 in Charlottesville, Virginia.
One people, one nation, and immigration. We're honoring the founding fathers who were white. We're honoring all of the great white men who are being smeared and defamed and torn down.
So I'm not going to play that whole video. I'm feeling a little, I'm feeling a little hurt this morning. But as you can see, in Charlottesville, this same anti-immigrant sentiment is exactly the same anti-immigrant sentiment that we're seeing with Kamala Harris. Yet, in the Kamala Harris example, all of which happened online through these recommendation systems, the people are Black, right? So this was an example, and we write about this in the article, of how we were seeing online white nationalist rhetoric now being adopted by Black.
One people, one nation.
I never seem to be able to do that. So we report all of this to Twitter. We say there's a disinformation network. We say these are the top tweeters. These are the top hashtags. This is something that you should pay attention to because they want to stop Black people from voting in the election. And this is what happens. So this is a Twitter follower from ADOS. They have the hashtag there. And this person is saying, below is the list of folks who participated in the hit piece from the Kennedy School at Harvard. We published in the Disinformation Review, and my Twitter handle is there. So they list all my co-authors. And this was part of a campaign to flood our inboxes, to try and get our addresses, to threaten us, to try and get their people to threaten us. And when we spoke to Google policy, because as you know, AI for the People is interested in informing the conversation around how algorithmic systems like social media should be used in the outside world, they just told us that this really wasn't a problem and we couldn't understand why until Karen Howe, at the MIT Tech Review did a study on Facebook, and she found that the spread of disinformation was so profitable for the company that they just, it was just a blind eye. And as somebody that sits on a content moderation board for a different social media platform, not Twitter or Facebook, that was really interesting to me, because at what point are we going to put the good of private companies, these private companies that are building their wealth from AI research, above the good of people? So this is mainly women, mainly Black women, who are now being harassed in this way. And so new questions. So as I start to, as I finish, a couple of things came up from us from that data set that I described. In the year 2016, 13% of Black men voted for Trump. In 2020, 19% of Black men voted for Trump, but we were also following this right-wing rhetoric online focused towards Black people. Black women were 4% for Trump, 2016. Black men, Black women, 9% for Trump in 2020. So we're seeing the numbers aren't big, but they are significant, 19%. It takes 20% of any population to get to a tipping point. We're interested in looking at Black people moving to the right and adopting this online rhetoric. We're also really interested by this.
The head of the House Freedom Caucus, Republican Representative Andy Biggs of Arizona, helped plan the January 6th event that culminated in a storming of the Capitol. That's according to Ali Alexander, a lead organizer of the gathering. Alexander, a pro-Trump personality, was an early founder of the Stop the Steal movement.
We're gonna save the Republic, right?
And helped bring together various right-wing factions around a mass event on January 6th. It was aimed to coincide with objections to the counting of the Electoral College. Alexander made his claim in 3 separate live streams in late December, adding that Representatives Paul Gosar of Arizona and Mo Brooks of Alabama were also involved.
I was the person who came up with the January 6th idea.
So I'm not going to play the whole of that, but we thought it was really interesting that a Black man was going on live stream, again, social media platforms, algorithmic environment, to let everybody know that a Black man planned the insurrection that we saw January.
The head of the House.
We're working with members of Congress.
And he's working with members of Congress. The other thing that we were really interested in is that this is Enrique Tarrio, who is the leader of the Proud Boys, a white nationalist gang, and he is Afro-Cuban, so he's also Black. So as we're talking to platforms now, we're thinking about data sets that we can build that can help us get a sense of this new right-wing rhetoric that we're seeing on online platforms. And really to finish off, and then I would love to get into discussion with you all. The question that's really guiding my work, or the thought that's guiding my work, is this quote from Michel Foucault. You know, the strategic adversary is fascism. The fascism in us all, our heads, in our bodies, in our everyday behavior. So I'm really interested in online right-wing rhetoric that can bring us to increasing numbers of Trump, bring us to online conversations that are anti-immigrant, bring us to online conversations that lead to voter suppression, and then, as we've just seen, stop the steal. And the reason that we do this is that I love technology. I love AI research. I have deep respect for computer scientists, but my question is always going to be, when can that AI truly work in the interest for and by the people? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Mutale, so we will ask some questions now. So let me just check the chat. Okay, so there is a. So Mutale, the first question I think that I have, and I think a lot of students also have, is like, what is the advice that you can give to young students in terms of who will be shaping these technologies of the future? What is the advice that you would give him? What aspects of the development of AI technologies they should pay attention to? They should focus. What they should demand to know about AI technologies in order for these future technologies to be more fair, more inclusive, less biased?
That's a really good, really good question. So I'm clearly speaking to folks that sit at the design. Like at the beginning, I talked about the 3 entry points for bias, right, being design, deployment, and governance. And I think as designers of these systems, thinking about protocols, I think in the research, pattern matching is a really good idea, like the idea that you would use an old data set to predict behavior in a new data set is really good, but it just doesn't work outside of test conditions. Mm-hmm. And the reason I say that is if you are making real world high stakes decisions for people's lives, like whether they should get bail or not, or whether they should be released or not, looking at bail records and looking at those determinations and using that to train the algorithm to pick up factors that can lead to that decision-making, for example, where people live. This is the COMPAS algorithm, where people live, level of education. All of those questions are wrought with questions of bias, because where we could live was governed in the United States by race. Up until the 1960s, we're still living with that legacy today. Access to education was something that was litigated in Brown v. Brown. 1955. So we're only, 60 years from a decision where Black kids could learn with white kids, so they would be less educated. And all of these lead to income levels. And if these become determinant factors of crime, you're really making it, you're really criminalizing Black people. And you need to think about that. So that's number one. Number two, I also think having, and I don't know where this starts, right? Because I was sharing with the students that I spoke to before, I was not trained to think about social determinants. And my training as a journalist comes out of, let me rephrase that. I was trained in sociology, so obviously that's about social systems. But when I went into technology and I professionalized, it was as if the technologies that were being produced were completely divorced from the society that they were going to get to. So we would want to build a better system, but we were never trained or incentivized or paid to think about how that system would impact. And one of the things I love that I'm seeing specifically from Google with Project Dragonfly is that engineers are now beginning to ask what they're working on. What is it for? And they're saying what they will work on and what they won't work on. The problem with that is that you do want to make sure that specifically if you're going to be in an alphabet company, that you're in the union so that you have protection, because people have lost their jobs around that. And for people that don't want to work in technology companies or academia, looking to government, there are now CTO and other jobs where having a knowledge of computer science can help in the design of cities, in the design of hospitals, in the design of policy. That was my entry point. And or civil society. So we're a pretty new organization, but we are building our research team. And we will be looking for computer scientists and UX designers and others to help us with future projects, whether that's the impact of the technology or trying to build alternative systems that have less impact. But that's what I would say, from the design and the deployment, those are two good places to figure out whether you're doing good or bad in the world.
We have a question from the audience. The question is the following. Do you regard any of the tech platforms as too morally or ethically compromised to work with?
Wow. Wow, that is, I probably wouldn't work at Facebook. I have been interviewed by Facebook and recruited by Facebook, but then I always mess it up. They never offer me the job. But that's a really hard one too, right? Because Facebook pays great money. It's great prestige if you can work there. But I think at this stage of my career, that would not be a company that I would go for. And it's because of the great investigative journalism of people like Karen Howe that let me know that despite knowing that disinformation is proliferating on their platform, that they still continue to allow some of these networks to thrive because they know that it makes money. They know that it has high engagement. YouTube, up until, some pioneering work that Joan Donovan has done over the last 5 years, has started to pull off videos. But even then, some of the videos that they pull off are, have tags like Black Lives Matter, which I would argue isn't a dangerous tag, but they have problems recognizing white supremacy as an issue for a long time. So I do think that some of these big, mammoth, mature platforms would be really difficult to turn around. They're too rich. They're too powerful. And my advice is anti-capitalist. It's always going to be think about people more, think about profit less. The reason I felt comfortable with TikTok is that TikTok is a 3-year-old company. And I think people forget that. And so I was interested to see engineers and researchers that had left the other companies to start this company because they didn't feel comfortable, what that would look like.
You also mentioned briefly autonomous driving, and the technology of autonomous driving. And since I do work on autonomous driving platforms and I'm interested in developing autonomy, can you comment more on which particular aspects of building autonomous driving systems you would be particularly cautious about? So that the systems are developed in a proper and fair way.
Yeah, so my interest in autonomous driving comes from Meredith Boussat's book, who's also a professor at NYU and a computer scientist, but she works in the journalism school. And she wrote a book called Artificial Unintelligence, because, and in it, she talks about how the autonomous cars, I don't know if this is still true, but it was true at publication, we're using facial recognition type technology to assess driver, I guess, tiredness. And that really, 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 really terrified me, because facial recognition technology as it stands, as recently as 2019, the commercial systems were not recognizing Black faces 40% of the time. And so if this was one of the sensors, if this was one of the capabilities of the car, I would be really, I would not get into a car that didn't recognize me, but then was using this idea that it could recognize me to make judgments around its performance. And I would also be really interested if that type of vision, computer vision was being used to decide if and when the car stopped. Because if that is, if you have a 40% error rate, as we found in Timnit Gebru and Joy Buolamwini's seminal work, then would it be running over Black people? That just makes me very scared. I have, on the other hand, I did watch a 60 Minutes on autonomous long haul trucks, which just drive on straight roads from one destination to another. And it seems that I feel safer when the road is straight. There isn't, it's not city traffic and people coming out and cats and dogs, and the road isn't swervy. But when it was a little bit more uniform, but certainly certainly in city locations, I still feel a little unsettled.
So my understanding is that there's a lot of, I would say, groundwork that needs to be done. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, also in terms of designing benchmark data sets, right? Because the data sets on which the systems are being trained may fundamentally contain such biases. And so this is important to, even when collecting the data, not even creating AI systems, but collecting the data itself, to make sure that these data sets are properly collected to include all potential cases, right? Like of course, people of different race, also to include to get rid of all the biases, right?
Yeah. And also but then there are other questions of how do you get those pictures in the beginning, because there are huge privacy concerns around just scraping Black people's faces to feed into the data set. That's the issue that Clearview AI are having in the press. And there was a great kind of expose of that company by BuzzFeed the other week in terms of their facial recognition. And then there's the famous story of Google Atlanta giving Black homeless people $5 so that one of their vendors could take their pictures that then would be used in training data sets as well. And I definitely would be somebody who I would caution against people even allowing that, because you don't know, once your picture appears in one of those data sets, you don't know whether it's going to be used to criminalize you or to be put into, I mean, driving a car doesn't seem like a high risk, you know, a driverless car isn't going to put you in jail or out your house. But the point is that same picture could be sold and resold and resold and resold by data brokers and end up in a system that harms you. And that's why I'm so interested in policy, because the thing that I don't want to see happen, and I do see happening, is making the assumption that it's the AI researcher or it's the computer scientist that is the biased one. And it's like, no, if you are working with a data set which has an initial data set that is encoded with bias, then that's not an engineer problem, that's a society problem.
But I also think that the issue is here that I think that maybe part of the issue is that we have so many social media, and I feel like we don't have enough regulations that come with this social media. So to some extent, the popularization of social media was so sudden that I think we didn't fully develop right ways to regularize their operation. So for example, even joining any social platform nowadays, right? You need to really, you have these terms and conditions that every user needs to approve before using the platform. These terms and conditions often are pages long document, which nobody reads, right? So really, even when I use any social platform, right, I don't really, I must say, I have not gained a full understanding of how this data are used, right? So I choose, for example, to use social platforms mostly for professional reasons, like advertising talks and so on and so forth. But I have friends who use it to post pictures and so on and so forth. And the question is, do they have a full understanding? Do any user of social media actually has full understanding of how that data is being used and processed? I think not. So I think that there's a lot of, I think that one of the problems is the lack of regulations that come with the popularization of social media.
Yeah, and that was really what we were looking at with the Deepfakes Accountability Act that I was involved in, where it was the first time that a member of the Congressional Black Caucus had really looked at content moderation and what that could look like at the federal level. And the thing that we really advocated for was the labeling of content. And of course, in 2020, we did see labeling of content on Twitter. We famously saw a sitting president being taken off the platform because with 80 million users and then high engagement rates, this was more powerful than news. I said in my, I said in my my introduction that this was 55% of American adults were going to social media to get that content, and the platforms did it, but then they can choose not to do it. So I definitely would agree that if we want a democracy, and if we want a democracy that works, then we have to legislate as if we want that democracy.
Thank you so much, Mutale. Do we have any more questions? Anybody from audience? If not, we will allow you to go for a break. I guess we're fine so far. Thank you so much, Mutale, for joining us today. And I hope we'll see you soon in person.
Yes, I'm down the block and my doorbell just rang, so this is perfect.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. Bye.